everyone, I'm Alan, also known as McLaren 2009, and today I'm going to be giving you a brief system overview of my train system microcontroller. Basically, this is a standardized microcontroller that I made for all of my train cars and locomotives. It allows you to transmit controlling data for an entire train from one leading locomotive or vehicle all the way to the farthest trailing vehicle in the train. It is a universal controller that is on both my cars and locomotives, and the reason for that is not every locomotive is directly connected to another locomotive. So I may want information sent from the front all the way to the back of the train. So the same information is transmitted through all of the electrical cable anchors from the front to the back of the train. Now, in order to set up this system on a train car, you need to have three things. Well, four things. You need to have the train system microcontroller. You need to have what I call the directional control panel, which is an instrument panel with two switches and two indicators. A train brake lever, or some comparable system to activate the train brakes, and what I call the brake status panel, which is two dials and two indicators. Now, the way that the system works is you have the microcontroller on this particular car. It's right there. There's the train controller. And it communicates, or it works based on the first simple question is this the lead vehicle in the train? If the answer is yes, then you don't do anything. This lever here, if this is considered the lead vehicle, this controls the brakes for the entire train. So, as you can see, this is currently at full, and that's currently at half. So, if we designate this as the controlling vehicle, we go back, and that's at full, that's at full, so on and so forth. Now, to verify that it is in fact doing what I say it's doing, and this lever is controlling the train brakes, let's turn this off. So, the brake is currently set to 0. 0 and 0. So, let's go aft. 0 and 0. 0 and 0. 0 and 0. As you can see, that front lever is controlling the brakes for the entire train. Now let's turn that back on, and brakes back up to 1 and half. But this is not the controlling vehicle, so let's turn external control back on. Now you'll see that the train brake is currently set to 0 and the independent is set to 1. Now, because there's only one number input for the variable brakes for the train wheels, I have it set up on all of my vehicles that anything designated as a train car has a train brake output connected to the wheels, but everything designated as a locomotive has a number output for the independent brake. So these have an independent brake, those have a train brake. It's not exactly the most realistic of systems, but it does work, and it does exactly what I need it to do. But, as kind of like a compromise to balance out the fact that the independent brake is not a completely separate system, it's still an air brake on the train, and it would be controlled by the automatic brake, just like the rest of the train cars. So with my controller, I have it set so that the train brake partially affects the independent brake, in that if or whatever the train brake is set at, the independent brake will get half of that as its output. So the two get added together in my locomotive. So basically, as long as you're applying some type of brake, you will stop the vehicle. And it will stop faster if you have more cars with more brakes being applied. But it only partially applies the independent brake of the locomotive. Okay, but controlling the brake systems is not enough. I also control the direction, so the reverser in all of the locomotives is synchronized, so all the locomotives are moving in the same direction. And it also controls the throttle of the engines. Now, unfortunately, my locomotives were made before I got any good working knowledge of locomotives, so all of mine are just straight diesel locomotives. They're supposed to be diesel electric, but mine are not. They are completely diesel powered. So, you control the throttle going to each of the engines. And because of the way my locomotives are designed, it is not a good idea to connect different locomotives, because they have different controllers with different engine settings. So trying to synchronize them would just not be a good idea. Now, you might be wondering, how does all of this work? Well, that very first question of, is this the controlling vehicle? If the answer is no, you turn on this switch for external control active. Now, the second switch is really only relevant if this switch is active, because the next question the system is designed to ask is, if this is not the controlling vehicle, is the controlling vehicle in front of or behind this vehicle? If it is, and what that is referring to is which electrical cable anchor is the controlling information coming from. By default, the system is set that every car, once it is spawned, is considered the controlling vehicle, so its brake lever controls the brakes for that vehicle. But if it is not the controlling vehicle, the default setting is that the brake, or that the controlling information, comes from the front electrical cable anchor. If it is not coming from the front electrical cable anchor, say it's coming from the back cable anchor, that is where this second switch comes in handy. You have power from rear. That means that the controlling information is coming from the back of the car going forward. So if you spawn a car going in the opposite direction, kind of like how I have these two locomotives back to back, this one is set to be powered from the rear. This one is not. That is your controlling locomotive. However, the system is set in such a way that I can easily configure the system for this to be the controlling locomotive. Now, you might be thinking, why on earth would I do that? The train is this way, why would I control it from this cab facing backwards? But it doesn't matter because the point still stands that I can do it. So, that determines which electrical cable anchor is currently active and which direction data is being transmitted through the car, and also through the train as a whole. So when setting up the cars, it's best to not cause any bugs or glitches in the system to connect the electrical cables from the front to the back. Don't just start jumping between cars and hooking up random cables. Do them methodically from the front to the back, and then set up the switches just to make sure that the results are consistent and not confusing. Now, I also said that this system controls the direction of the train by way of controlling the reverser. So, this locomotive is set to have the reverser inverted. That's weird. It's like this locomotive is set to have the reverser inverted. So, it is going in the exact opposite direction as that locomotive. But, well, there's not really any output into showing how that system works. But I did include such an output in my caboose. Now, this is the farthest vehicle in the train. The caboose is generally where a conductor would sit. So, let's go in here, let's turn on some lights, turn the radio up a little bit, look at the map. Alright, now, in here we have our current speed, which it's weird that it wasn't 0 for a second there, but as you can see, the independent brake is still set to 1, the train brake is set to 0, we're not moving, that's the time, and here's the reverser. The reverser is currently at 1, meaning the lead locomotive is set to go forward. Now, this caboose also has a button to invert the reverser, so that this dial will still show if you're traveling left or right. But I don't need to press the invert reverser because, well, this is the front of the caboose, and the front of the train is that way. So we are going to be moving right, looking at this screen. So, as you can see, the reverser information is being transmitted along the length of the train. So, now let's go back up to the locomotive, because there's a little bit more things required for a locomotive than is required for a car. because for a car, you just need the microcontroller, the direction control panel, the train brake lever or comparable system, and the brake status panel. The locomotives require a little bit more information because, well, they control all of the systems for the train. So, naturally, you need to have methods of controlling all of those systems. So, inside of the locomotive, you still have your direction control panel, and you still have a train brake control panel. However, you also have an independent brake panel, a reverser, and a throttle. And you still have the same brake status panel. Now, as you can see in this locomotive, it is currently set up to be controlled remotely from the leading locomotive. There's also one more switch that you're going to need, and that is this switch right here. This is to invert the reverser. So whatever information is coming from the leading locomotive, it will be multiplied by -1. So that this locomotive will do the exact opposite of what that locomotive will do. Now, the difference with, or a difference with my locomotives is I've recently started using a navigation light system that uses RGB lights. So it would be green on the right and red on the left. And I've made it so that the navigation lights are tied to the invert reverser button so that it shows that red is on the left and green is on the right, indicating that this locomotive is facing backwards relative to the rest of the train. So as you can see, that being the lead forward-facing locomotive, red is on the left, green is on the right, and since this one is backwards, red is still on the left and green is on the right. Now, let's go up to the actually, before we do that, let's start this engine. So, fuel pumps are on. Let's start the engine. There's our RPS, engine temp, and our fuel is currently good, 93%. Alright, now let's go up to the front locomotive, preferably without falling off of it. And let's start this locomotive. As you can see, the reverser is set forward. Let's turn that off, turn that down, and let's start the engine. Engine started. No brakes are currently applied. So, let's go aft and check the second locomotive to ensure that no brakes are applied. I can also get out and check the brakes on all of the cars, but as I've already demonstrated in this video, there's no point in doing that. Okay. Now, as we can see, the brake information is correct. Let's pull forward. So let's sit down in the seat, and let's throttle up. Now we look out here. You can see we are pulling forward. Alright, but that doesn't quite explain it. Alright, so you can hear my somewhat questionably made engine controller, fluctuating with RPS as it tries to match the speed for the locomotive, or tries to match the speed for the page controller. So let's go aft and see if this locomotive is fluctuating the same. As you can see, it is. And we're still getting the same identical wheel slip in this cab as we are in that cab. So, basically, the engines are perfectly synchronized. Now, let's turn the throttle off, and let's apply the train brake. As you can see, full train brake, half independent brake. Okay, now, let's switch it to reverse. Brakes are off, throttle up. As you can see, we are moving reverse, exactly as we're supposed to. And, just to further demonstrate that this system is working how it's supposed to, let's go back to the caboose. And with the train brake and independent brake, as you can see, as we're passing by all the cars, they still have the train brake active. Now we've reached the caboose again. Let's go back inside, and the reverser says -1, so we are going left instead of right. And the brake is showing exactly what it is supposed to. And as you can see, this also has the RGB nav light system, so red is still on the left and green is still on the right. But in any regard, that is my full train system controller overview. In summary, it allows you to control not just the brakes of an entire train, including locomotives, it also allows you to control the direction the train is moving, the throttle of the engine, and each vehicle is set up in such a way that it can be the controlling vehicle for the entire train. And then the best part is, matter of fact, I can demonstrate that really quickly. Let's go back up into our locomotive. Well, it'll further exemplify why you don't want to do this. But let's do this one first, so I don't mess anything up. Looks like it's going to show why you don't want to do this. Power from rear. This is now the controlling locomotive. Let's go backwards. Okay. Now we'll go up to the front locomotive. It's like this is going to show why you don't want to do this. External control, power from rear, invert reverser. Currently the brakes are set to 1 and 1. Alright, turn off the independent, turn off the train brake. Reverser is set to negative. Let's turn the map back on. And let's go forward. That was weird. As you can see, this is now the controlling locomotive. And let's turn that down a little bit so we don't blow anything up. And we'll go forward to the now being controlled locomotive. And you can see, same wheel slip, no brakes. And it's still working exactly how it's supposed to. So, that concludes my train system controller. Thank you and have a nice day.